Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. What's up, everybody, and welcome to the program. You know, we've talked a lot about New Mexico and why Jeffrey Epstein would choose a place like New Mexico when he could have went anywhere in the whole entire world and set up shop. Several things. One, the location. Very close to the Santa Fe Institute and Los Al. That's a huge deal for Jeffrey Epstein. We know that he collected scientists the way I collected or you collected sports cards or trading cards growing up. We know that he wanted to have access to these people at all times. And we also know about his weird and wacky fixation with stuff like transhumanism and seeding the human race with his DNA. So we know that he was into some wacky shit in New Mexico, right? And we also know, and I believe this played a huge part in it, that he did not have to sign up as a sex offender in New Mexico according to the rules that were on the books in the state. Now, New Mexico has a big problem with human trafficking. One of the top places in the country, and it's an even more of a problem for the indigenous girls who live in New Mexico. There's a ton of native people who live in New Mexico, and the problem of human trafficking within the community is just very, very, very big. And there's no resources really to address it, right? So it goes on and on and on and on and on and on again in New Mexico. And Jeffrey Epstein knew the deal. He knew that if he went to New Mexico and he didn't have to register as a sex offender, and he had all of his powerful friends there, the King family and other folks, well, it would be a lot easier to fly under the radar, right? Got your buddy Bill Richardson looking out for you. Everything's all good. So Jeffrey Epstein decided to pack up from his metropolitan lifestyle in New York, living on the beach in Florida, hell, having a whole island to himself in the Caribbean, all to move to the middle of the desert. Doesn't line up. Unless, of course, there were other motivations. And from where I'm sitting, that's exactly what happened in New Mexico. There were other motivations. Santa Fe Institute, Los Al, the scientists, the sex offenders' age for registry. You add all of that stuff up, and then you top it with all of his political connections in the state, and you understand why Jeffrey Epstein would set up shop in New Mexico. At least from the standpoint of him being a scumbag, disgusting human trafficker anyway. Well, today, I actually have some good news out of New Mexico. And usually when we hop onto the podcast to talk about things, it's bad news, right? Well, not today. At the very least, New Mexico is starting to take the steps to begin to crack down on human trafficking. Now, I'd love to see the state of New Mexico initiate their own investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. That would be nice, huh? A bunch of concurrent investigations going at the same time. Don't you think if you were the Attorney General Balderas in New Mexico, that you'd want your own investigation to what occurred in your state to perhaps your citizens? I think I would. But we haven't seen any of that from Balderas. But at least the lawmakers in New Mexico are starting to take notice of what's going on, and they finally passed a bill in the House that really increases the penalties for people who are caught engaging in crimes such as human trafficking. So let's jump into this article from the nmpoliticalreport.com, and let's see what's up. This article was authored by Susan Dunlap. Headline: Bill to increase penalties for human trafficking passes House. So, always good when some movement begins within these states. Always a good idea for the states to pass laws like this, right? I mean, I don't understand how it's not beneficial to everybody's society and everybody, obviously, who's involved in being trafficked, I don't see how this is a bad thing for anybody, unless, of course, you're one of these human traffickers. A bill to increase the penalties for human trafficking and expand protections to survivors of the crime advanced out of the House of Representatives Monday with a nearly unanimous vote. Wait, what? Nearly unanimous vote? Who would vote against something like this? I honestly don't understand what's wrong with people. The vote ended up being 63-3. So I wonder who the three people who voted against it are. People that probably are tied to the King family would be my guess, or something like that, right? Jeffrey Epstein's the leftover remnants of fellow travelers that are still inhabiting New Mexican politics, perhaps. But all kidding aside, who the hell would vote against this? HB 56 passed 63-3 and now heads to the Senate. Sponsored by Representative Georgine Lewis, Democrat of Albuquerque and of the Acoma Pueblo, the bill increases the penalty for human trafficking from a third-degree penalty to a second-degree penalty for perpetrators if their victims are 18 or older. What? How about it's all just a first-degree penalty and just one law for these human traffickers? If you're caught trafficking human beings and they're over 18, well, I'd say a good 25 years or so is probably a good starting point for penalties. And if they're under 18, I'd say 50 years is a good starting point for penalties. Human beings are not to be traded as if they were just, commodities on Wall Street. These are people with lives and they have dreams and hopes and all sorts of different outlooks on life. And people who had all of that stolen from them by human traffickers and other scumbags. And to think that they're talking about second-degree penalties or third-degree penalties, I don't even understand. How about the most draconian crimes that are committed are met with the most draconian penalties possible? For human trafficking crimes that involve a victim under the age of 18, the penalty for the perpetrator would be increased to a first-degree penalty. Yeah, it should. Look, I think it should be a first-degree penalty for all of it, honestly. The trade in human flesh is basically what they're doing, right? It's a modern-day slave trade. So I think it's all draconian, and I think it should all be met with the fiercest penalties on the books. In fact, I think we should update the penalties on the books and make it even that much more harsh when you're caught. Lewis said human trafficking is not limited to one type of victim. That is a fact. We see a lot of underprivileged girls being trafficked, right? We see a lot of girls from broken homes who use drugs, etc., being trafficked. But it could happen to anyone. You could get caught up with the wrong people, you could get groomed, and before you know it, this whole entire life is normalized for you, and you have some sick, disgusting dude in charge of everything you do. So yeah, this could happen to anyone from any walk of life, and we see the grooming process occur even at the highest points of life, right? We see it with even cultured people fall into cults and whatnot. The bill would also classify human trafficking as a serious violent offense, which could limit the amount of time an offender can have reduced for good behavior. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Let's get some teeth in these bills, right? I want these bills to slap back at these fools when they get caught. I want these people to understand that if this is the sort of behavior you're going to engage in, then you can expect a very long stay at the state-run facility or a federally run facility with no hopes of getting out for good time or for time served or anything like that. Full sentence. That's what it should be for human trafficking. No gray area, none of that at all. The bill amends the Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act, called SORNA, to include human trafficking, so that a perpetrator would have to register with the state. Another great idea. Imagine these human traffickers get nailed. They have to register as sex offenders as well. Good. Do it. Let's get the list. I am the last one right, that likes databases or registries. But when it comes to something like this, you have ceded your rights to privacy. All right? When you're engaging in trading in human flesh, you have given up your right to humanity almost at this point. So yeah, I think there should be a registry for these people, and I think that it should be publicly accessed. It also expands the law so that a perpetrator who owns a secondary residence in the state would also be required to register. Well, what do you know, folks, huh? That is directly because of the Jeffrey Epstein case. Directly because of what we talk about on a daily basis. So now, say you're a sex offender in New York, and you decide you're going to move to New Mexico. Well, now you have to register, okay, in New Mexico as well as in New York. Whereas before, in certain circumstances, you did not. Just take a look at Epstein. New York financier, pedophile, Jeffrey Epstein maintained a second home in New Mexico, and though he was a registered sex offender in Florida, he did not have to register as such in New Mexico. It's all such a joke, right? If you're a sex offender, like Jeffrey Epstein was, you should be in some sort of federal database so the whole entire country understands what sort of sick prick you are. Because people like this should not be able to fly under the radar. People like this should not be able to be your neighbor or have access to your children. And folks, if we think it's only Jeffrey Epstein, if he's the only one of these people that's out there, boy, we're sorely mistaken. This is a serious problem, and it's about time that New Mexico starts to address it as such. The bill also expands protections so survivors forced into sex work will not be charged with the crime of prostitution or as an accessory to human trafficking. Well, what do you know? What do you know? An actual bill that's nuanced, that takes a look at the grooming process and what these victims who turn into survivors go through? That's a good idea. What do you know? State actually doing its job to protect people. There's no way that a girl who is being coerced into a human trafficking operation should have to worry about getting a prostitution charge if she comes forward. And this is why I talk about there being another division of a sort that deals with people like this. Women, prostitutes especially, on the streets. They don't want to talk to cops because they know they're going to jail. So there needs to be a middleman or a middle woman that gets out there and talks to them, sees what's going on. Is there a psycho running around? Are any girls missing? All of that stuff. And we could help try and safeguard these girls a little bit more instead of trying to make them criminals for lives that a lot of times they haven't even chosen for themselves. Representative Mo Mastis, Democrat Albuquerque, who was one of the three who voted against the bill, said he had some issues with it. He disagreed with the bill provision that the perpetrator would be forced to pay restitution to the victim. Yeah, okay, I wonder why, Mr. Mo Mastis, Democrat from Albuquerque. What are you so worried about? Worried you're going to get caught up in this, you sick bastard? You're worried that they have to pay money? Guess what? Sometimes that's the only way to make people pay, all right? He said there is a victim reparation fund, and the victims of human trafficking should be included to have access to that fund instead. See, they try to muddy the waters. Here's an idea. How about the victims, survivors of human trafficking, decide their own fate, decide what course they want to take? Not some fund that you set up for them. We see how that's working out for the survivors in the Epstein case, don't we? So take your fund and stuff it. You will never make these survivors whole under these circumstances, Mastis said. I've been in those courtrooms. There's no sense of closure, or making someone whole and not getting restitution frustrates survivors more. Yeah, look, there needs to be some sort of financial restitution, right? And if there's some sort of fund set up by the state that helps provide medical coverage for these people, yeah, that's great. Hell yeah. But I don't know why you would vote against this. Meistes said a victim reparation fund can help offset hospital costs, but his main concern was that the bill, if passed, could be used retroactively against offenders who took plea bargains that included not being required to register on the sex registry. Retroactively for sex registration is a big deal. I can't support it. We have to move forward. It's unjust. We should definitely consider not doing it, Meistes said. The other two representatives who voted against it were Representative Angelica Rubio, Democrat from Las Cruces, and Representative Christine Chandler from Los Alamos. Now, that is, it's slippery ground, right? But you're going to have to be able to navigate it as a lawmaker. You're going to have to put some safeguards in there and, figure it out one way or the other. But the fact of the matter is this. What was on the books in New Mexico certainly wasn't cutting it. And now, at the very least, we see some movement. We see the lawmakers in New Mexico finally wake up from their peyote stonage and decide to get active. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All of the links that go with this episode can be found in the description box. To everybody who has donated to the PayPal, thank you folks very much. All right, everybody, I will be back later on, and we will pick up where we left off. Enjoy your day, everybody.